Hello, good evening, good night and good day. Another foray into Med 2 experience research comes your way. The last installment of Total Waffle testing was all about how experience affects archer effectiveness, and today we turn our attention to the Cavalry of Middle-earth. As thus indicated, these videos will feature the Lord of the Rings-based mod Divide and Conquer, but the result should indeed be indicative, if not conclusive, for any other iteration of Medieval 2. The theme of today's test will be how experience impacts cavalry charges. There is nothing quite like getting that perfect cavalry charge. That moment when your riders punch deep into enemy lines to inflict calamity, mayhem, and more than a moderate amount of discomfort upon your foes. First, I want to set the ground rules for today. 5 units of cavalry, going from average to decent early game units, and then into solid and elite late game combatants will be tested in their capability of charging down Gondor infantry head on. These tests will be performed without flanking, since this topic really deserves its own video with its own bespoke methodology. Each unit will be tested 3 times, for each of 6 different experience levels to get a good sense of the overall trend in terms of experience gained and the effects thereof. Each charge will be given a 5-second window in which to cause its damage, measured from the moment of impact and timed with the stopwatch of my old Nokia 3310. Since my secret North Korean reflex boosters have yet to arrive, patent pending, I am relying on less than ideal spidey sense conditions, and we must therefore accept the risk of marginal differences from each test to the next. Of course, I give you my waffle word that the accuracy of my timing has been well rehearsed, and my neighbour has presented me with her wonderful seal of approval. 3 metrics will be recorded for analysis. Cavalry kills, denoting the effectiveness of the charge, cavalry deaths, denoting, well, sadness I guess, and then the kill-death ratio will serve to indicate the gains in overall unit efficiency. After all, effectiveness may rout the enemy and win the battle, but efficiency may win the war. Before testing begins, we would do well to understand the key dynamics to look out for when cavalry units come charging into their foes. Firstly, the damage dealt is not actually chipping away at something like a health bar, point for point, as it is in games such as Age of Empires. Instead, each damage impact sets off an interaction of probabilities wherein the chance of a kill is increased by the damage dealt and decreased by the defense of the defending unit, and for generals and certain units, the number of hit points. From my experience of playing the game, I believe the system works something like this. When 2 units engage in combat, the attack damage of the attacking unit goes up against the defense rating of the defending unit. A unit with damage output of 3 will have only a low chance of taking away a hit point from a unit with 20 or more defense. However, it is nonetheless a possibility. Conversely, a unit with a damage output of 20 will have an overwhelming chance of taking out the unit with 3 defense, but there is a small chance that they fail to do so. Each hit point will add another layer of defense that the attacker must bring down in order to kill the defending individual. It is not impossible for a unit with 10 damage points to land a killing blow to a general, but due to the combination of defense and hit points, the odds of this actually happening are incredibly low. The charge is interesting because it seems to combine attack damage and charge damage in one singular punch. Not only that, it also seems to have a multiplying effect of sorts. My experience with the game leads me to speculate that there is a time-related attack duplication occurring, meaning that every second or so that the cavalry charge goes on, the cavalryman has a chance of landing another attack on the defender directly in front of them. The likelihood of this happening seems to be influenced by the mass stat relationship between the attacker and the defender. Infantry generally has the lowest mass stat, cavalry has a bit more, and trolls and beasts have an inordinately high mass stat to work with. As such, what we have before us here is an interaction between a complicated web of variables. The damage and defense stats are directly affected by the charge multiplication effect, which, in turn, is affected by the mass stat of the units involved. And then, lastly, all of these variables are affected by how well the charging and charged units manage to maintain their unit cohesion and angle of attack, with flanking charges and rear charges drastically impacting how well the defending unit can apply its defense points. These results will then also in turn be affected by however many hit points the defending unit has. The overall point I'm trying to get to here, beyond creating a framework for understanding charge damage, is just how contingent the results of a charge will be on factors outside of the unit cards that you can plainly see within the game. There is so much chance involved that we will have to consider the results to be indicating trends as opposed to concretely depicting replicable outcomes. With the ground rules and expectations of these tests established, let's take a trip to the financially deprived but ever so charmingly fishy men of Dale. These riders are a staple, of Dale's early game, and as such they compare negatively in stature to the Gondor infantry pitted against them in this test. They typically do very well against early game goblins from Dol Guldur and can even land some decent rear charges against the early tier orcs of Gundabad. This test challenges early game cavalry greatly because here they are actually asked to plow head-on into more medium tier infantry. What do we want to see when looking at results like this? We want the kills to be high, the deaths to be low, and the kill to death ratio to sit at around 2 as a minimum. This would mean that for each horseman killed, he has taken at least 2 enemies with him. Not a sustainable ratio by any means, but do keep in mind that this test underplays the strength of the charge by going straight into the front line of the defenders. Nevertheless, as experience increases, we see that kills per charge increase along with it. But we also see that the charge becomes more quote-unquote efficient. The increase in kill to death ratio that we see from 0 to 9 experience is not going to blow any minds, but comparing the highest experience to the lowest nonetheless sees a 38% difference. It does not change the fundamentals of how you'd use Dale cavalry in battle, but it means that the sneaky flank into enemy archers is going to go a lot better with the addition of experience. The Wargs of Isengard are not a great cavalry unit, but they do have their uses, specifically in ambushing or underprepared enemies and spreading fear among the lesser combatants on the field. I typically find that they perform slightly better than the cavalrymen of Dale, but due to their camel-like mounts, they charge quite differently to normal horsemen. They struggle more and more as the game goes on, but the early game can see them shine on occasion. Looking at the data before us, the key word that I'd use about the Warg Rider is volatility. Heading up to 5 experience points, we see a mighty jump in kills, which then falls on the following levels of experience. The average death tally also goes up, although it dips as well, which also reveals what one might call a distorted trend. It is easy to see that performance at the top levels of experience is higher than on the lower experience levels, but exactly how well the unit performs is more volatile and influenced chiefly by exactly how well the wargs resist the damage that they inevitably suffer on the charge, as well as many of the elements of chance discussed earlier in general cavalry charge theory. The volatility may also be explained by a relatively low defense stat and a relatively high attack stat. Together, these give you a unit that packs a hotter punch than, say, Cavalry Militia, Dale Cavalry, or Thorn Riders, for example. But they also mean that you have to be even more careful about charging them in to the front of enemy units. Dealing a lot of damage into the backs of ideally preoccupied enemies seems the most efficient way to use the Wargs of Isengard, and indeed, Warg Riders more generally. Charging them into a unit nominally capable of resisting cavalry, spears, polearms, or heavy infantry in general will only cause you pain. Indeed, the lesson we learn from the wargs is one of paradoxes. Be cautious, yet aggressive. Timid, yet terrifying. Like a particularly aged cheese, your enemies will run before you when pushed to perfection. Representing the solid middle tier for this list, at least in version 4.6, the Mounted Warband of Dunland has some fun implications for our testing purposes. In terms of tier, they are the closest match here compared against the Gondor infantry, so let's take a look at the data that resulted from their rounds of particularly violent speed dating. Overall, the kills and the kill-to-death ratios are improved across the board, and I dare say that the ratio especially seems a lot more stable this time around. Not once did it dip below 3.25 kills per death, which speaks to the general increase in quality provided by the Warband. Their charge is more reliable in terms of the attack pattern, and this helps the unit strike with more decisive and deadly force than the lower tier units we looked at previously. This comparison is especially favorable against the wargs, which were all over the place in pretty much all metrics. There was of course some variation, and in one decidedly curious turn of events, the average kills for the 1 XP Warband turned out so high that they actually beat the 9 XP unit by virtue of losing 1 less of their number on average. With that said, the 7 XP ones more than made up for this by being the first of our units to average above 20 kills per charge. Despite the inherent volatility of cavalry charges, it is absolutely possible to see quite a difference from lowest scoring unit without XP at all to the highest kill-tallied troop of horsemen. Their kill-to-death ratio was also quite high at 4.79, only beaten by the interesting, shall we say, 3 XP Warband, which apparently didn't get as aggressive as the other ones, resulting in the fewest deaths, and thus, despite low kills, the highest kill-to-death ratio of the entire lot. However, even this highest ratio so far will be blown out of the water by our next contestants, as we cross from the early game tiers into the upper mid-game tiers. It is time for... When it comes to reliable cavalry and reliable units in general, few nations do it quite like the Dunedain. As the later game arrives, you can access this lovely cavalry unit, and it represents a significant power spike for Aragorn's armies. While not at the top of their roster, they are a unit that will remain relevant from the minute they enter your life and until the campaign ends. I think that their stats actually slightly undersell just how well they have performed in this particular test, and the resulting numbers reflect this rather well. This is where the discrepancies between kills and deaths become so high as to become nigh meaningless. Only a single XP level saw more than 1 cavalryman die on average, and on the following XP level, no losses were incurred at all. In this light, the most important metric becomes the kill tally, which reliably increases across the scoreboard. So reliably, in fact, that the final average is more than twice as high as the initial one, from 27.33 to 57.67. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this is the most straightforward trend demonstrated by any of our tested units. This is especially apparent from the aforementioned doubling of kills from 0 to 9 XP. Here is the best explanation that I can provide to make sense of these results. My immediate observation is that the Dunedain Cavalry have managed to make greater gains in terms of unit cohesion kept on the charge as opposed to any other unit tested here today, making their attacks more effective overall as their experience increases. What you often see when charging cavalry into infantry is that with a strong resolve, the infantry unit can break the unit cohesion of the cavalry that charges them, and as such limit the damage that they incur. Similarly, the charge momentum that the cavalry may have can also be affected drastically by a well-placed defense. With each experience point gained, the cavalry unit will mitigate its loss of cohesion and momentum. The positive results of the Dunedain Cavalry therefore come from two mutually reinforcing trends. 1. As experience increases, the improved cohesion on the charge enables the full potential of the Dunedain Cavalry charge damage to be realized. 2. Each new chevron level brings about its hard-coded increase in attack damage. Together, these two factors combine to make an above-average cavalry unit very potent indeed, because their resolve and unit cohesion end up reflecting those of the most experienced and elite cavalry units in the game. With this in mind, let us move on to Imladris. This is where the whole experience comparison theme of this video began to break down for real, because very little actually changed over the course of the testing of these monstrous cavalrymen. These elven riders smash through the Gondorian lines so effectively that usually 2/3 of the troops die. Over the course of all the tests we did, we saw only a difference of 11 kills. This makes the gains of the Eldarinwe less substantial than those of the Dale Cavalry, with their approximately 30% higher kill tally at the extreme ends. Similar to the deal with archer accuracy discussed in the previous installment of this video series, the highest tier units already have near optimum means of ensuring that they make the most of their damage potential, and therefore their experience-related increase in combat effectiveness flatlines despite even great experience gains. There is also something to be said for matching unit levels. A mid-tier infantry unit against the finest cavalry in Middle-earth is hardly a fair fight, and these tests reflect exactly this. Nonetheless, the result also gives a real sense of just how powerful the Roquen really are. More than once, they ended up routing the Gondor infantry within 5 seconds of combat. The result is that they simply gain a bit of extra punch from their increase in damage, while many of the factors outside of unit stats are unaffected. Let us now compare some of the main trends that we have observed throughout this video. In terms of kills on the charge, what we see here is a decently clear trend line indicating that when experience increases, the kills per charge increase as well. There are bumps along the way caused by the host of interacting variables discussed in the second chapter of this video, making the trend less convincing than that of the archers in the previous episode, but the trend is still there. Specifically, the Dunedain Cavalry have seen a remarkable boost to their performance. In contrast to the archer video, where all archers basically performed better with experience, but the lower tier archers especially improved, here the picture is a lot more nuanced. When looking at the deaths per charge, it is evident that lower tier cavalry struggles particularly. Experience may help them net a few more kills, but the increased melee exposure that this gives them in combat also leaves them more vulnerable to counterattacks, particularly when going up against decently robust units such as Gondor's infantrymen. We also see just how much power imbalances between units matter. The Dunedain, being of a demonstrably higher tier compared to the Gondorians, negate their attempts at countering the charge, leaving the infantry completely at the mercy of their fully multiplied charge attack. This results in a kill-to-death ratio that is several times higher than that of the Dunlending mounted Warband, despite the stat difference of the two units being nowhere near as extreme. As for the case of the Roquen, they exhibit the same breakdown of the charge resistance as we saw with the Dunedain Cavalry, but they also take it to such a level that they are statistically incomparable to any other cavalry unit tested today. I think it speaks volumes of the quality of the Eldarinwe Cavalry that their test results do not even seem to speak the same numerical language as the test results from any of the lesser units. I'm actually pretty sure that a unit of Roquen could be sitting still in guard mode, respond minimally to the charge attack of the Gondor infantry unit, and still come out on top. In fact, that is what you are seeing play out right in front of you. And the result of that little test kinda says it all, doesn't it? My key takeaway is that your cavalry does indeed benefit from experience, but that this benefit is only truly apparent when your cavalry unit is engaging an inferior enemy in terms of stats, tactical engagement, or, ideally, both. It is a multiplier of the advantage that cavalry units can exercise upon their foes, especially dismounted foes. And especially dismounted foes whom they can charge in their flanks or in their backs. Of course, this was not tested here, but my hypothesis is that such advantage would indeed compound with the tactical advantage of a rear charge. The Dunedain Cavalry was the obvious key beneficiary of experience in these tests, but this may actually just say more about the power dynamic at play between the Dunedain Cavalry and the Gondor infantry than it does about the intrinsic quality of either unit. More tests could very well be done with lower tier cavalry against lower tier infantry. I hypothesize that the results would then mirror those experienced by the Dunedain in these tests. However, as an empiricist at heart, I will say that further tests will be needed to more firmly establish this causal link between experience and improved charging ability across unit skill levels. What do you think though? What are your conclusions from the results of these tests? Let me know your thoughts down below and leave the video a like if you found it interesting. If you're new around here, you can accept my welcoming cup of tea by clicking the subscribe button, and then I will indeed see you soon for testing, for campaigns, or other good fun. As we say in Denmark, farvel og tak, farewell, and thank you for watching.